Good evening, sweetheart. It's Maggie. Come sit with me. Let's make this night a gentler one. Tonight, there isn't really anything planned. No list waiting on the table. No small promise I made to myself earlier in the day. Not even one of those gentle intentions we sometimes keep, just so the evening doesn't feel wasted. It's the 6th of January, 2026, and the night arrived without asking what I wanted it to be. I noticed that earlier, how the hours slid into each other without shape, without direction. And instead of correcting it, I let it happen. I'm sitting here now, in the same chair I always choose, with the room dimmed just enough that nothing feels urgent. The clock is here somewhere, but I haven't checked it. Tonight doesn't seem interested in being measured. There was a time when an evening like this would have made me restless. I would have stood up, opened drawers, rearranged small things, just to convince myself that the night had a purpose. But tonight, I stayed seated, not because I was tired, not because I was sad, just because nothing asked me to move. There's something unfamiliar about a night that doesn't present itself as an opportunity. No invitation to improve. No reminder to prepare. Just space. I wonder if you know this feeling too. That moment when the day ends and you realize you haven't planned what comes next. And instead of relief, there's a faint tension in the chest, as if stillness were a responsibility you forgot to train for. We don't talk much about that, about how silence can feel awkward when it arrives unannounced. Tonight doesn't seem to mind, though. The walls aren't expecting anything from me. The shadows haven't lined up to be explained. Even the darkness feels patient. I think that's what makes this night different. It isn't waiting for me to decide who I'm supposed to be in it. I'm just here, breathing in slowly, breathing out without counting. Sometimes that's harder than doing something The mind is so used to filling space with thoughts, with plans, with small urgencies we pretend are necessary. And when none of those appear, the quiet can feel louder than noise. But tonight, I'm not trying to soften it. I'm letting it be exactly as empty as it is. There's no story I need to tell you yet. No memory pressing at the edges. Just this moment, unlabeled, unclaimed. I find myself listening to the sound of my own breathing, not the way you do when you're checking if something's wrong, but the way you listen when you're realizing something is steady. In and out. This night wasn't meant to be productive. It wasn't designed to carry meaning or lead anywhere special. And maybe that's exactly why it feels important. If you're sitting somewhere right now, unsure what to do next, you're not behind. You're not missing anything. You're simply in a night that doesn't need to become more than it already is. We'll stay here together for a while. No plans, no agenda, just this gentle beginning. It's interesting how a night with no plans can feel heavier than one that's full. I'm sitting here exactly where I was a moment ago, and yet something has shifted. Not in the room is patient. Not in the light hasn't moved. The shift is quieter than that. It's the realization that there's nothing I'm supposed to do next. And for some reason, the body notices that before the mind does. There's a subtle tightening just beneath the ribs. Not fear, not worry, more like expectation with nowhere to land. I used to mistake that feeling for laziness. I'd tell myself that if I were a better version of me, this night would already be filled. But tonight, I'm watching that impulse instead of obeying it. The strange thing is, the moment I stop trying to assign myself a task, the weight doesn't increase. It softens, as if the heaviness wasn't coming from the emptiness itself, but from the effort to escape it. We've been taught quietly that unoccupied time is something to fix, that a night without intention is a missed opportunity. But I wonder who decided that, because this evening doesn't feel broken. It feels undecided. and undecided things aren't the same as failures. I let my shoulders drop just a little, not all the way, just enough to tell my body that it doesn't have to brace. That tightness beneath the ribs loosens, not because I solved it, but because I stopped arguing with it. It's a small change, so small it would be easy to miss if I weren't paying attention. This is usually the moment when the mind rushes in, when it starts offering suggestions. You could stand up. You could check something. You could make a plan for tomorrow. Those thoughts arrive like helpful guests who don't realize the room is already full. I don't push them away. I just don't invite them to stay. There's a difference between ignoring a thought and letting it pass through. Tonight, I choose the second. The weight I felt earlier is still here, but it's changed shape. It no longer presses forward. It rests. I realize something then, and it's quiet enough that I almost miss it. The discomfort wasn't asking me to act. It was asking me to notice. Notice how rarely we allow ourselves to be unfinished for an evening. How often we demand closure from hours that were never meant to close. This night doesn't want resolution. It doesn't need to be summarized. It doesn't need a takeaway. It only asks that I stay seated long enough to feel what's already here. And strangely, that feels lighter than doing something. If you're feeling that same weight right now, that quiet pressure to do, you don't have to answer it. You can let it sit with you. It knows how. We'll stay with this a little longer, not to understand it, just to allow it to lose its urgency. There's a point in the evening when the silence changes, not in volume, but in intention. Earlier, the quiet felt like a question. Now, it feels like an answer that doesn't need words. I'm still sitting here. I haven't shifted much. The chair supports me without comment. The room hasn't grown impatient. This is usually the part where we rush in to fill the space. A sound, a thought, a distraction, anything to prove we're still participating. But tonight, I'm practicing something different. I'm letting the silence remain unfurnished, not empty, just undecorated. I notice my breathing again, not to control it, just to acknowledge that it's happening. In and out. There's something almost uncomfortable about allowing a moment to be exactly what it is. We're so trained to add meaning, to extract value, to turn time into something useful. But this silence isn't asking for improvement. It's asking for permission. Permission to stay. I feel a subtle urge to narrate, to explain what this moment means. And I recognize that urge for what it is, a habit, so I don't follow it. Instead, I let the silence sit between us, not as a gap, as a presence. It's surprising how quickly the body adapts once it realizes nothing is required. The jaw softens, the breath deepens without instruction. Even the mind slows its pacing, not because it's forced to, but because there's nowhere it needs to arrive. This is not meditation. There's no goal here, no insight waiting at the end. Just sitting, just being without commentary. I wonder how often we deny ourselves this, not because we can't afford the time, but because we don't trust what happens when nothing fills it. Tonight, I'm learning to trust it. The silence doesn't swallow me. It holds. That feels important. If you're listening right now and the quiet feels unfamiliar, you don't need to adjust. You don't need to lean forward. You can stay exactly where you are. Let the silence do the work. It's better at it than we are. We'll remain here a little longer, not to achieve anything, just to see what happens when we don't interfere. There's a moment, usually unnoticed, when darkness stops trying to be dramatic. It stops reaching for you, stops asking you to interpret it. Tonight, the dark has settled into its own shape. Not heavy, not empty, just there. I didn't turn on any extra lights, not because I'm trying to prove something, but because the room feels complete with only this small circle of glow. Everything beyond it has permission to remain undefined. At a certain age, you stop needing to see everything clearly to feel safe. You start trusting what doesn't announce itself. The corners of the room are dark now, not threatening, just quiet. They hold their outlines gently, like thoughts you don't need to finish. I realize something as I sit here. So much of my life was spent trying to illuminate everything, every feeling, every choice, every moment. as if clarity was the same thing as control. But darkness teaches differently. It doesn't explain. It doesn't rush. It simply allows things to exist without being examined. That's a relief I didn't know I was allowed to have. I notice how my eyes no longer strain to adjust. They've accepted the level of light they're given. There's wisdom in that, in accepting what's enough. The night outside is quiet too. Not silent, just restrained. A distant car passes somewhere. Then nothing. Even the world seems to be practicing not filling the space. I think about how often we confuse darkness with absence, as if what we can't see must not be there. But sitting here, I feel the opposite. The dark is full of rest, full of unspoken permission. It holds the parts of me that don't need to be resolved tonight, the questions that can wait, the memories that don't require revisiting. I don't push them away. I simply don't invite them forward. That feels like a kindness. There was a time when a night like this would have made me uneasy, when not having plans felt like failing some invisible test. Now it feels like arriving somewhere without needing directions. The darkness isn't empty. It's generous. It gives back the effort I've been carrying all day. I let my shoulders sink again, not on purpose. They just know they're allowed. If you're here with me and the dark around you feels unfamiliar, you don't need to brighten it. You don't need to name it. Just sit. Let the darkness be what it already is. Not a problem, not a signal, just the room exhaling with you. We'll stay a little longer. The dark isn't going anywhere, and neither are we. The rain has returned, not louder, just closer. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It taps the night the way a hand rests on a table without knocking. I didn't plan for this sound or for this feeling, but here they are, arriving together. There's something deeply comforting about not having to decide what comes next. No schedule waiting, no intention forming, no internal voice asking, "So what now?" Tonight, the answer is simple: nothing. And nothing feels surprisingly full. I think back to years when an unplanned evening felt like wasted time. when stillness was something to fill instead of something to enter. Back then, I kept lists, even at night, mental ones, invisible but loud. Now, I let the night keep its own list, and I don't ask to see it. The chair holds me without expectation. The room doesn't wait for instructions. Even the rain seems content to fall without purpose, beyond falling. I realize how rarely we give ourselves permission to exist without direction, as if being alive must always point somewhere. But tonight, being here is enough of a destination. I wrap the blanket a little closer, not because I'm cold, because I can. Choice without consequence is a small luxury. There's no version of me I'm supposed to become by the end of this hour. No insight required, no lesson to extract. Just a woman, a chair, a lamp, and rain remembering the ground. I notice my breathing slow further. It follows the rain now. In, out. No rush to complete the cycle. This is what rest feels like when it isn't scheduled, when it isn't earned, when it simply arrives and stays. I think about how often we postpone rest until everything else is resolved, as if peace were a reward instead of a resource. Tonight, I take it first. The darkness outside softens the edges of the world. Nothing feels sharp. Nothing insists. If you're listening and your evening feels undecided, you're not behind. You're not lost. You're simply between intentions. And that space is kinder than we're taught to believe. You don't need to know what tomorrow holds to let tonight hold you. I rest my hands on my lap. They're warm. They don't need to do anything to justify that warmth. The rain continues its small work. The chair continues to support. And I continue to be here. Nothing is required. Nothing is missing. This is not an intermission. This is the evening itself. Not stopping, just easing. The rain is changing its mind, not leaving, just loosening its grip. That's how nights end sometimes, not with a clear goodbye, but with a soft retreat. I can feel the evening settling into its final shape now, not closing, just completing itself. There's a kind of knowing that arrives at the end of a quiet night. Not certainty, not answers, just a gentle recognition that nothing more is required. The chair across from me is still empty, but it no longer feels like absence. It feels like space that has done its job. Earlier, that chair felt like a question, a shape waiting to be filled. Now, it feels like a period at the end of a sentence. Not lonely, not sad, complete. I look at it differently now, not as a place where someone should be, but as proof that not everything needs to be occupied to be meaningful. Some spaces exist so we don't forget how to breathe. I notice how my body feels as the night winds down. Not heavy, not alert, just present. My thoughts have slowed enough to stop bumping into each other. They pass quietly now, like neighbors nodding without stopping to talk. This is the part of the night I used to miss. The part after reflection, after memory, after deciding. The part where nothing new arrives, and that's the gift. I don't reach for my phone. I don't check the time. The night doesn't need to be measured to be felt. Outside, a car moves through wet pavement, then disappears. The sound lingers just long enough to remind me the world is still there, but it doesn't demand my attention. Neither does tomorrow. Tomorrow can wait outside the circle of light. Tonight belongs to this final stillness. I think about what it means to carry a night like this forward, not as a memory to replay, but as a tone, a texture, something internal that softens the next day without announcing itself. That's how these evenings work. They don't change your life. They change how you hold it. If you're sitting with me now, at the end of this quiet, take a moment before standing up. Let your body register that it rested. You don't have to name what you felt. You don't have to take anything with you. Just notice that something inside has eased. The chair across from me will still be there tomorrow. It doesn't hurry. Neither do I. This night didn't ask for plans. It didn't ask for meaning. It only asked to be sat with. And we did. I think that's enough for one evening. Rest well tonight, sweetheart. Good night. From me, Maggie.